The coastal lowlands of Georgia in the year 1794 were a place of haunting beauty and hidden perils. The air was thick with the scent of salt, decay, and the relentless fecund growth of the swamp. The town of Salisbury Point was a precarious collection of clapboard houses and dirt roads carved into the edge of a vast, mist-shrouded marsh known locally as the Weeping Fen. Life here was dictated by the tides and the weather, and the most feared weather of all was not the hurricane, but the fog. It did not simply roll in, it seeped up from the sodden ground, a cold gray shroud that swallowed sound and sight, isolating every house, every person in a world of damp, clinging silence. It was during one such fog, in the late autumn of that year, that the singing began. At first, it was so faint that those who heard it dismissed it as a trick of the wind whistling through the marsh reeds, or the mournful cry of a distant loon. But the pattern held. With every thick fog, the sound returned, growing clearer, closer. It was a woman's voice, high and achingly sweet, singing a lullaby. The melody was simple, a gentle, rocking tune, but the words, when one could make them out, were a litany of despair. "Hush, my darling, don't you cry. Mama's here, beneath the sky. Sleep, my angel, close your eyes, where the deep, black water lies." The voice seemed to drift with the fog itself, directionless and ever-present. It was the sound of a grief so profound it had become a permanent feature of the atmosphere, as natural and as chilling as the fog that carried it. The people of Salisbury Point, a superstitious lot by necessity, locked their doors and pulled their children closer when the fog grew thick. They called it the Weeping Mother's Lullaby, and they knew, with a primal certainty, that to answer its call was to be lost to the fen forever. The origin was a mystery, a ghost story to frighten children. But every ghost story has a beginning, and the beginning of this one was soaked in blood and sorrow. A spectral lullaby haunts the fog-bound marshes of Salisbury Point, a mother's eternal, heartbreaking search for a lost child. The town lives in fear of the mist and the song that rides upon it. But where did this song come from? And what happens to those who are drawn to its sorrowful melody? The mystery of the weeping mother is about to claim a new victim, pulling a young woman into a story of grief that has echoed for decades. To follow the investigation into the lullaby of Lillian, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of this haunting tale.
The first modern victim of the lullaby was a boy named Elijah Walker. He was 12 years old, a quiet, dreamy child who felt a deep, poetic connection to the wild landscape around him, a sentiment most in the practical-minded town found foolish. He was fascinated by the legend of the Weeping Mother, seeing not a monster, but a figure of profound sadness. He would often sketch the marsh, trying to capture the feeling of the fog in charcoal lines. One evening, a particularly dense fog settled over Salisbury Point, and with it came the lullaby, clearer and closer than ever before. Elijah's parents, fearing the old stories, ordered him to stay inside. But as the voice drifted past his window singing of a lost child in black water, something in Elijah's heart broke. He didn't hear a threat. He heard a plea. He believed he could help. He could show the lost mother that someone heard her, that her child was remembered. Quietly, he slipped out the back door and into the oppressive gray mist. His family discovered he was missing an hour later. A search party was formed, but the fog was impenetrable, and the lullaby seemed to mock their frantic calls, weaving around them, always just out of reach. They found his sketchbook, left open on the windowsill. On the top page was a fresh drawing, not of the marsh, but of a woman's face, beautiful and etched with an unbearable sadness, her arms outstretched as if to embrace someone. Beneath it, he had written a single line: "She is just lonely." Elijah Walker was never seen again. The only trace was one of his shoes, found mud-caked and waterlogged at the edge of the Weeping Fen. His disappearance transformed the local superstition into a tangible, modern terror. The lullaby wasn't just a story, it was a predator, and it had taken one of their own. The tragedy consumed the town, but it consumed Elijah's older sister Annalise most of all. Where others saw a reason to fear and forget, Annalise saw a mystery that demanded an answer. She would not let her brother become just another verse in the weeping mother's song. The disappearance of Elijah Walker has proven the deadly power of the spectral lullaby. The town is gripped by a fresh wave of terror. But for Elijah's sister Annalise, grief has forged a steely resolve. She refuses to accept the supernatural explanation as the final word. Who was the weeping mother in life? What tragedy bound her spirit to the fog? And can understanding her story bring peace? Or will it only lead to more danger? Annalise is determined to find out, even if it means walking into the fog herself. To follow her dangerous quest for the truth, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
Annalise Walker was 19, with her brother's same thoughtful eyes, but where his gaze had been dreamy, hers was now sharp with purpose. In the weeks following Elijah's disappearance, the town began to retreat into silence, wanting to bury the pain and the fear. But Annalise could not. She began her investigation where all stories in a small town eventually lead, with its oldest residents. She visited Mr. Abernathy, the ancient, reclusive owner of the general store, who had ledgers dating back 50 years. She sat with Granny Meg, a Creek woman who lived on the outskirts of town and knew the stories the land held long before the settlers arrived. Piecing together fragments of gossip, old records, and whispered legends, a name emerged from the past: Lillian. Lillian had not been a local. She had arrived in Salisbury Point in the summer of 1770, a young woman of striking beauty and evident refinement, fleeing some unnamed scandal in Savannah. She had taken a small cottage on the very edge of the Weeping Fen with her infant daughter, Charlotte. She kept to herself, her life a mystery, her only companion her child. The townsfolk, suspicious of outsiders, largely left her alone. Then, in the foggy autumn of 1771, tragedy struck. Lillian's cottage was found empty. A neighbor, investigating the silence, found signs of a struggle: an overturned cradle, a single muddy footprint too large to be Lillian's. The baby, Charlotte, was gone. Lillian, half mad with grief, had accused the town of indifference, of hiding the truth. She had spent the following weeks wandering the edges of the fen, calling her daughter's name, singing her a lullaby. One morning, after a particularly thick fog, she too was gone. Her body was never found, but her song was. Annalise had found the source. The weeping mother was Lillian. Her lullaby was not a malevolent curse, but the eternal echo of a specific, horrific moment: the abduction of her child.
The fog was not a random vehicle. It was a recreation of the conditions of that terrible night. But knowing who did not explain why the phenomenon persisted, or why it was now taking people like Elijah. Annalise realized the story was incomplete. The truth of what happened to Charlotte and to Lillian was still buried in the fen, and she was the only one willing to dig for it. Annalise has uncovered the human heart of the ghost story, a mother named Lillian, whose child was stolen from her. The lullaby is a fossil of her grief. But this knowledge only deepens the mystery. Why does her search continue so violently decades later? What unresolved injustice fuels this eternal recurrence? Annalise believes the key lies in discovering the fate of the missing infant, Charlotte. To do that, she must confront the town's dark secrets and finally listen to the lullaby's full, terrible message. The search for a lost child from the past is about to begin. To follow Annalise into the heart of the mystery, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
Armed with the name Lillian, Annalise began to look at her town with new, suspicious eyes. The official story was that a wandering traveler or a bandit had taken the child, but that story felt thin, a convenient fiction. Why would a bandit take a baby and leave a relatively untouched cottage? The footprint found had been that of a man's boot, a common enough item, but Granny Meg, in a hushed conversation, had hinted at something else. She spoke of a wealthy, influential man in the town at that time, a man with a hungry heart and a wife who could bear him no children. Annalise's research led her to the founding family of Salisbury Point, the Blackburns. In 1771, Silas Blackburn was the town's patriarch, a plantation owner, merchant, and de facto ruler. His wife, Eleanor, was known to be frail and deeply unhappy. They had no heirs. Scouring old church records and property deeds in the town hall basement, Annalise found a chilling document. It was a private bill of sale for the very cottage Lillian had occupied, signed by Silas Blackburn. He had been her secret landlord, and the sale was dated just 1 month after Lillian and Charlotte had disappeared. The pieces clicked into a monstrous picture. Silas Blackburn, desperate for an heir, had seen in Lillian a vulnerable, beautiful outsider with a child. He had orchestrated the abduction of Charlotte, likely raising her as his own, and had driven Lillian to her death in the fen. The lullaby was not just Lillian's grief, it was her accusation. It was a truth that Salisbury Point had buried, and now the land itself was screaming it back at them every time the fog grew thick. Annalise understood now why the lullaby had taken Elijah. His innate compassion, his desire to answer a cry in the dark, had made him a target for a spirit that was not merely sad, but righteously, furiously unjust. The spirit didn't want comfort, it wanted justice. It wanted its child back, and it was using the fob to lure those who might listen, who might finally unearth the terrible secret the Blackburns and the town had kept. The current patriarch of the Blackburn family was Jonas Blackburn, Silas's grandson. He lived in the same great house on the hill, a man who still wielded immense influence. Annalise knew her search for the truth was now a direct threat to the most powerful man in town. The historical mystery has been solved, revealing a chilling tale of theft and murder. The Weeping Mother is not a random ghost, but a wronged woman seeking justice from beyond the grave. The Blackburn family, the pillars of Salisbury Point, are built on a foundation of lies and blood. Annalise now holds a dangerous truth, but what can she do with it? The town will not want to hear it, and Jonas Blackburn will surely silence her. How can one young woman confront a powerful dynasty and a vengeful spirit at the same time?
The confrontation is inevitable. To see how Annalise brings the past to light, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. Annalise did not go public with her discovery. She had no proof beyond a historical theory. Instead, she went directly to the source, Jonas Blackburn. She requested a meeting under the pretext of discussing a donation for the search efforts for her brother, a lie that tasted like ash in her mouth. She was admitted into the opulent Blackburn Manor, a house that felt old and heavy with secrets. Jonas Blackburn was a man in his 50s, with a cold, patrician demeanor. He listened to her feigned request with polite disinterest. Then, Annalise changed tactics. "I've been researching the history of our town, Mr. Blackburn," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I came across a fascinating story about a woman named Lillian. She lived in a cottage your grandfather Silas owned. She disappeared along with her baby in 1771. The change in the room was immediate and palpable. Jonas's face tightened. "Old tragedies," he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Superstition, not fit conversation for a young lady." "I found the bill of sale for the cottage," Annalise pressed, watching him closely. "Dated after she vanished. It's almost as if your grandfather was tidying up a loose end." Jonas Blackburn stood up, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "I suggest you stop this digging, Miss Walker. The past is best left buried. Some holes, once opened, have a tendency to swallow people whole. Your brother, I believe, learned that lesson." The threat was clear. He knew about Elijah's fate and was warning her away. But his reaction was all the confirmation she needed. He knew the story. He knew the truth. As she was shown out, her gaze fell upon a large family portrait in the hall. It showed Silas Blackburn, his wife Eleanor, and a young girl with striking, dark eyes. Eyes that looked nothing like the pale, wan features of the Blackburns. The girl had a locket around her neck, a unique floral design that Granny Mag had described Lillian wearing. The stolen child, Charlotte, had been raised right here, in this very house, as a Blackburn. The injustice of it took Annalise's breath away. Lillian's own daughter had been taught to call another woman mother, while her true mother's voice haunted the marshes, forever searching. The lullaby was not just a cry of grief, it was a scream of betrayal. Annalise has confronted Jonas Blackburn and seen the truth in his eyes and on his walls. The stolen child Charlotte was raised as his aunt, her true identity erased. The Blackburn fortune is built on a monstrous crime. But Jonas has issued a direct threat, and Annalise now knows she is in danger. How can she expose this secret without being silenced? And what role does the spectral Lillian play in this modern confrontation? The past and present are on a collision course, and the next foggy night will bring the final, terrifying reckoning. To witness the climactic encounter between the living and the dead, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. A storm blew in from the coast 2 days after Annalise's meeting with Blackburn, and with it came the thickest, most suffocating fog Salisbury Point had seen in years. It was a palpable entity, silencing the world, reducing it to a sphere of gray a few feet across. And as it settled, the lullaby began. But this time, it was different. The voice was no longer distant and mournful. It was close, sharp, and filled with a raw, focused fury. It did not wander. It seemed to be moving with a purpose, its path cutting directly through the town toward the hill upon which Blackburn Manor stood. "Hush, my darling, don't you weep. Mama's promises she'll keep. Sleep, my angel, in your bed, with the lies inside your head." The words had changed. The sorrow was now fused with a chilling intent. The spirit of Lillian was no longer just searching, she was hunting. She knew the truth had been uncovered, and her eternal moment of grief was transforming into a moment of reckoning. The townspeople, hearing the altered song and its deliberate path, locked their doors in terror. But this time, their fear was mixed with a dawning guilty understanding. The ghost was not coming for them. It was going for the Blackburns. Annalise, watching from her window, knew this was the moment. This was the convergence of past and present that the curse had been waiting for. She knew she had to be there. She had to bear witness. She had to try and guide this terrible energy, to channel vengeance into justice, to give Lillian the acknowledgement she had been denied for decades. Ignoring her parents' frantic pleas, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the consuming gray. She was not following the lullaby. She was walking alongside it, a partner in this final spectral inquest. The fog parted for her, and the voice of the lullaby seemed to swell, acknowledging her presence. She was walking into the heart of the story, to write its final bloody chapter. The final fog has arrived, and with it the weeping mother's lullaby has transformed into a song of vengeance. The spirit is no longer a passive echo, but an active force, moving with purpose toward the Blackburn mansion. Annalise, braving the supernatural storm, has chosen to intervene, to act as a bridge between the living and the dead. What happens when a century-old injustice finally confronts its perpetrators? Can a spirit achieve the justice it was denied in life? And what role will Annalise play in the explosive climax? The haunting of Salisbury Point is reaching its endgame. To witness the terrifying resolution, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. Annalise moved through the ghostly landscape, the lullaby a guide and a companion. The fog was thickest around Blackburn Manor, swirling like a vortex. She found the front door slightly ajar, as if the mist itself had forced its way in. Inside, the house was cold, colder than the night outside. The air hummed with a psychic pressure that made her teeth ache. She could hear Jonas Blackburn's voice from the study, shouting, laced with fear and fury. "It's just the wind! A trick of the storm!" She entered the study. Jonas stood with a pistol in his hand, his face a mask of terrified defiance. His wife and children were huddled together, sobbing. And standing between them, visible for the first time, was Lillian. She was not a decaying corpse, but a figure of ethereal, tragic beauty, her form woven from the fog itself. Her arms were outstretched not in a plea, but in an accusation. Her gaze fixed not on Jonas, but on the large family portrait, on the image of the girl, Charlotte. "You took her," a voice whispered, not from Lillian's mouth, but from the very air, the very walls. It was the lullaby, stripped of its melody, reduced to a raw, spoken truth. "You gave her my name to the swamp, and your name to her. You buried me in the mud, and my child in lies." Jonas fired the pistol. The blast was deafening in the confined space, but the ball of lead passed through Lillian's form and shattered the window behind her. She did not flinch. Instead, she took a step forward, and the fog in the room coalesced around Jonas Blackburn. It did not attack him physically. It showed him. It forced into his mind the full horrific experience of Lillian's final moments. The discovery of the empty cradle, the desperate search in the fog.
the crushing realization of the betrayal, the cold, suffocating embrace of the fen as she gave up her life. He experienced her grief, her terror, her despair. It was a psychic avalanche, a flood of another's agony that his mind could not withstand. He screamed, a high, thin sound that was not his own, and collapsed to the floor, his body twitching, his eyes wide and unseeing, lost in a nightmare from which he would never wake. The justice Lillian delivered was not death, but empathy, the forced, total comprehension of the pain he had caused. The reckoning is complete. Jonas Blackburn has been confronted not with violence, but with the overwhelming, soul-shattering weight of Lillian's grief. His mind has broken under the burden of a suffering he orchestrated. The spirit has achieved a poetic and terrible justice. But what of the other stolen life? What of Charlotte, the child raised on a lie? The spirit of Lillian now turns her attention to the portrait, her longing undimmed by vengeance. The final act of this tragedy is one of bittersweet resolution. To see how the story of Lillian and Charlotte finds their end, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
With Jonas Blackburn catatonic on the floor, the fury in the room subsided. The oppressive, angry energy faded, leaving only the profound, timeless sorrow of a mother separated from her child. Lillian's form turned from Jonas and floated toward the portrait of the Blackburn family. Her spectral hand reached out, not in anger, but with an infinite tenderness, toward the painted face of the young girl, Charlotte. Annalise, her heart breaking, understood what was needed. The spirit was trapped not by a desire for vengeance, but by a lack of closure. She needed to know her child was safe, that she was loved, even in the life that was stolen from them both. "She had a good life," Annalise whispered into the heavy air, addressing the spirit. "The records show she was educated, cared for. She married a man from Savannah and moved away. She had children of her own. She was loved, Lillian. She was happy." It was a partial truth, a necessary mercy. The spirit of Lillian seemed to still, listening. The lullaby began again, but now it was soft, the way it must have sounded in the cottage so long ago, sung to a real child in a warm cradle. "Hush, my darling, sleep so deep. Mama's love her soul will keep. Dream, my angel, through the years. Quiet now, all dried your tears." As the final note hung in the air, the form of Lillian began to brighten, her features softening. She looked at Annalise, and for a fleeting second, there was not a ghost, but a woman. Grieving, yes, but also grateful. Her form dissolved not into nothingness, but into the fog, which itself began to thin and pull back from the house, retreating to the marsh from whence it came. The psychic weight lifted. The air grew warm. The haunting was over. Lillian had finally found what she was searching for. Not vengeance, but the knowledge that her child had been okay. She had been released from her eternal vigil. In the corner, Jonas Blackburn whimpered, a broken man trapped in a memory of drowning. The justice was complete. The spirit of Lillian has found peace. Having learned that her stolen daughter lived a full life, her eternal grief has been assuaged, and she's been released from her torment. The haunting of Salisbury Point is over. But the living are left to pick up the pieces. The Blackburn name is disgraced. The town's secret is exposed, and Annalise is left with the complex aftermath of her quest. What is the legacy of the weeping mother now that her song has been silenced? And what becomes of those who were touched by her story? The final chapter explores the echoes that remain after the ghost is gone. To understand the full impact of these events, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the final chapter.
The dawn after the fog revealed a Salisbury Point, forever changed. Jonas Blackburn was confined to his home, a babbling invalid. His mind shattered. The truth of his family's founding crimes spread through the town like wildfire, confirmed by the terrified accounts of his family and the evidence Annalise had gathered. The Blackburn power, built on a lie, crumbled in a single night. The town, initially fearful, was forced to confront its own complicity, the generations of silence that had allowed the haunting to fester. Annalise was viewed with a mixture of awe and unease. She was the one who had walked into the fog and faced the ghost. She was the one who had broken the Blackburn dynasty. She had avenged her brother, but the cost was a burden of knowledge and notoriety that would follow her all her days. She found Elijah's sketchbook and placed it, along with a written account of Lillian's true story, in a small wooden box. She buried it at the edge of the weeping fen, not as an act of hiding but of remembrance. It was a marker for two lost souls, Lillian and Elijah. The physical fog lifted and never returned with the same supernatural intensity. The lullaby was never heard again. The weeping fen was just the marsh once more. But the story became the new bedrock of the town's identity. It was no longer a scary story to frighten children, but a cautionary tale about the cost of injustice and the long memory of grief. The town, in its own way, adopted Lillian. They spoke of her not as a monster, but as a wronged woman, a mother. The official story was rewritten. The cottage site was cleared and left as a quiet, respectful meadow. Salisbury Point had been forced to remember, and in remembering, it found a measure of peace. The immediate terror has passed, leaving behind a transformed community. The Blackburns have fallen. The town has been shamed into honesty, and the spectral lullaby is silent. Annalise has achieved her goal, but her victory is bittersweet, shadowed by personal loss and the weight of her experience. The ghost is gone, but the history remains, now acknowledged and integrated into the town's soul. What is the final enduring legacy of Lillian's song? The story concludes with a reflection on memory, grief, and the stories we tell to make sense of our past. To hear the final words on the Lullaby of Lillian, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the final chapter.
Annalise Walker never left Salisbury Point. She married the town's young school teacher and, in time, became its unofficial historian and storyteller. She made it her life's work to ensure that the true, complex story of Lillian was never forgotten or simplified into a mere ghost story. She taught the children of the town about the real woman, her tragedy, and the danger of secrets. The buried box at the edge of the fen became a local legend in its own right, a place for quiet reflection. Years later, on a calm, clear autumn day, Annalise took her own young daughter to the meadow that was once Lillian's cottage. The air was still. The only sounds were the natural ones of the marsh. "Mama," her daughter asked, "is the weeping mother still here?" Annalise looked out over the peaceful, sun-dappled fen. "No, my love," she said softly. "She's not weeping anymore. She's resting, but she's still here, in the stories we tell, in the way we remember to be kind, in the understanding that some grief is so big it can change the world." She did not sing a lullaby. The silence was a testament to the peace that had been hard won. The Lullaby of Lillian became a part of the landscape, not as an act of curse, but as a layer of its history. It was a story that taught Salisbury Point that the past is not a ghost to be feared, but a teacher to be heard. The true horror had never been the singing in the fog. It was the human cruelty that created it.
And the true resolution was not the exorcism of a spirit, but the courageous act of listening, of acknowledging a pain so deep it had echoed through time. The song had ended, but the memory remained, a quiet, enduring note of caution and compassion woven into the very fabric of the town, ensuring that such a silence would never again be broken by a mother's cry of despair. The story of the bloody lullaby of Lillian is a profound exploration of grief, justice, and historical memory. It demonstrates that the most terrifying hauntings are born from real-world crimes, and that the only way to lay a ghost to rest is to confront the truth it represents. The legacy of Lillian is not of fear, but of remembrance, a reminder that every community has its buried secrets, and that the price of silence is often a song of sorrow that will not be stilled. If you are drawn to the deepest and most dramatic stories of history, to the moments where the human heart confronts its greatest tragedies, then your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the darkest corners of history and the human experience.